Today I was looking for some sketches related to something for gardening and all. I stumbled across some readings by A. Milne. Most of you probably associate him with the Winnie-the-Pooh stories, which I admit I love and I've never outgrown. But he actually did do a lot of writing for adults as well, including some sketches that he did for Punch magazine, which was a British humor and satire magazine. And the readings I'm doing today are from a book called Happy Days, which was a selection of those writings. So I'm going to read from the section called Out of Doors. As you will see, the author and I are probably both in need of a little bit of help with our gardening skills, but here we go. We're starting out with a sketch called The First of Spring. There may be gardeners who can appear to be busy all the year round, doing even in the winter their little bit under glass. But for myself, I wait reverently until the 22nd of March is here. Then, spring having officially arrived, I step out onto the lawn and summon my head gardener. James, I say, the winter is over at last. What have we got in that big brown-looking bed in the middle there? Well, sir, he says, we don't seem to have anything, do we, like? Perhaps there's something down below that hasn't pushed through yet? Maybe there is. I wish you knew more about it, I say angrily. I want to bed out the macaroni there. Have we got a spare bed with nothing going on underneath? I don't know, sir. Shall I dig 'em up and have a look? Yes, perhaps you'd better, I say. Between ourselves, James is a man of no initiative. He has to be told everything. However, mention of him brings me to my first rule for young gardeners. Never sow spring onions and new potatoes in the same bed. I did this by accident last year. The fact is, when the onions were given to me, I quite thought they were young daffodils, a mistake anyone might make. Of course, I don't generally keep daffodils and potatoes together, but James swore that the hard round things were tulip bulbs. It is perfectly useless to pay your head gardener half a crown a week if he doesn't know the difference between potatoes and tulip bulbs. Well, anyhow, there they were in the herbaceous border together, and they grew up side by side, the onions getting stronger every day and the potatoes more sensitive. At last, just when they were ripe for picking, I found that the young onions had actually brought tears to the eyes of the potatoes, to such an extent that the latter were too damp for baking or roasting and had to be mashed. Now, as everybody knows, mashed potatoes are beastly. The rhubarb border. The rhubarb border gives me more trouble than all the rest of the garden. I started it a year ago with the idea of keeping the sun off the young carnations. It acted excellently, and the complexion of the flowers improved tenfold. Then one day I discovered James busily engaged in pulling up the rhubarb. "What are you doing?" I cried. "Do you want the young carnations to go all brown?" "I was going to send some in to the cook," he grumbled. "To the cook? What do you mean? Rhubarb isn't a vegetable." "No, it's a fruit." I looked at James anxiously. He had a large hat on, and the sun couldn't have got to the back of his neck. "My dear James," I said, "I don't pay you half a crown a week for being funny. Perhaps we had better make it 2 shillings in future." However, he persisted in his theory that in the spring people stewed rhubarb in tarts and ate it. Well, I have discovered since that this is actually so. People really do grow it in their gardens, not with the idea of keeping the sun off the young carnations, but under the impression that it is a fruit. Consequently, I found it necessary to adopt a fern line with my friend's rhubarb. On arriving at any house for a visit, the first thing I say to my host is, "May I see your rhubarb bed? I have heard such a lot about it." "By all means," he says, feeling rather flattered, and leads the way into the garden. "What a glorious sunset," I say, pointing to the west. "Isn't it?" he says, turning round, and then I surreptitiously drop a pint of weed killer on the bed. Next morning, I get up early and paint the roots of the survivors with iodine. Once my host, who for some reason had got up early too, discovered me. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Just painting the roots with iodine," I said, "to prevent the rhubarb falling out." "To prevent what?" "To keep the green fly away," I corrected myself. "It's the new French intensive system." But he was suspicious, and I had to leave 2 or 3 stalks untreated. We had those for lunch that day. There was only one thing for a self-respecting man to do. I obtained a large plateful of the weed and emptied the sugar basin and cream jug over it. Then I took a mouthful of the pastry, gave a little start, and said, "Oh, is this rhubarb? I'm sorry, I didn't know." Whereupon I pushed my plate away and started on the cheese. Asparagus. Asparagus wants watching very carefully. It requires to be tended like a child. Frequently, I wake up in the middle of the night and wonder if James has remembered to put the hot water bottle in the asparagus bed. Whenever I get up to look, I find that he has forgotten. He tells me today that he's beginning to think that the things which are coming up now are not asparagus after all, but young hyacinths. This is very annoying. I am inclined to fancy that James is not the man he was. For the sake of his reputation in the past, I hope he is not. Potting out. I have spent a very busy morning potting out the nasturtiums. We have them in 3 qualities: mild, medium, and full. Nasturtiums are extremely peppery flowers and take offense so quickly that the utmost tact is required to pot them successfully. In a general way, all the red or reddish flowers should be potted as soon as they are old enough to stand it, but it is considered bad form among horticulturists to pot the white. James has been sowing the roses. I wanted all the pink ones in one bed and all the yellow ones in another, and so on. But James says you never can tell for certain what color a flower is going to be until it comes up. Of course, any fool could tell then. "You should go by the picture on the outside of the packet," I said. "They're very misleading," said James. "Anyhow, they must be all brothers in the same packet." "You might have a brother with red hair," says James. I hadn't thought of that. Grafting. Grafting is when you try short approaches over the pergola in somebody else's garden and break the best tulip. You mend it with a halfpenny stamp and hope that nobody will notice, at any rate not until you've gone away on the Monday. Of course, in your own garden, you never want to graft. I hope at some future time to be allowed, even encouraged, to refer to such things as the most artistic way to frame cucumbers, how to stop tomatoes blushing. The homeopathic method of putting them next to the French beans is now discredited, and spring fashions in foxgloves. But for the moment, I have said enough. The great thing to remember in gardening is that flowers, fruits, and vegetables alike can only be cultivated with sympathy. Special attention to be given to backward and delicate plants. They should be encouraged to make the most of themselves. Never forget that flowers, like ourselves, are particular about the company they keep. If a hyacinth droops in the celery bed, put it among the pansies. But above all, mind a firm hand with the rhubarb. The next little chapter is the coming of the crocus. "It's a beautiful day again, sir," said my gardener James, looking in at the study window. "Beautiful, James, beautiful," I said as I went on with my work. "You might almost say a spring was here at last, like." "Cross your fingers quickly, James, and touch wood. Look here, I'll be out in a minute and give you some orders, but I'm very busy just now." "Thought you'd like to know there's 11 crocuses in the front garden." "Then send them away, we've got nothing for them." "Crocuses!" shouted James. I jumped up eagerly and climbed through the window. "My dear man," I said, shaking him warmly by the hand, "this is indeed a day. Crocuses! And in the front garden, on the south lawn. Let us go and gaze at them." There they were, 11 of them, 6 golden ones, 4 white, and a little mauve chap. "This is a triumph for you, James. It's wonderful. Has anything like this ever happened to you before?" "There will be some more up tomorrow, I won't say or not." Those really are growing, are they? You haven't been pushing them in from the top? They were actually born on the estate? There'll be a fine one in the back bed soon, said James proudly. In the back? My dear James, in the spare bed on the northeast terrace, I suppose you mean? And what have we done in the Dutch ornamental garden? If I has to look after ornamental gardens and South Asparagus and all, I ought to have my salary raised, said James, still harping on his one grievance. By all means, raise some salary, I said coldly. Take the spade and raise some for lunch. I shall be only too delighted. This here isn't the season for celery, as you know well. This here's the season for crocuses, as anyone can see if they use their eyes. James, you're right. Forgive me. It is no day for quarreling. It was no day for working either. The sun shone upon the close-cropped green of the deer park. The sky was blue above the rose garden. In the tapioca grove, a thrush was singing. I walked up and down my estate and drank in the good fresh air. James, I called to my head gardener. What is it now? He grumbled. Are there no daffodils to take the winds of March with beauty? There's these 11 but there should be daffodils too. Is not this March? It may be March, but 'tisn't the time for daffodils. Not on 3 shillings a week. Do you only get 3 shillings a week? I thought it was 3 shillings an hour. Likely an hour. Oh well, I knew it was 3 shillings. Do you know, James, in the Scilly Islands there are fields and fields and fields of nodding daffodils out now? Lor, said James. Did you say lore or liar? I asked suspiciously. To think of that now, said James cautiously. He wandered off to the tapioca grove, leant against it in thought for a moment, and came back to me. What's wrong with this little bit of garden, this here park, he began, is the soil. It's no soil for daffodils. Now what daffodils like is clay. Then for heaven's sake, get them some clay. Spare no expense, get them anything they fancy. It's too alluvial, that's what's the matter, too alluvial. Now crocuses like a bit of alluvial, that's where you have it. The matter with James is that he hasn't enough work to do. The rest of the staff is so busily employed that it is hardly ever visible. William, for instance, is occupied entirely with what I might call the poultry. It is his duty, in fact, to see that there are always enough ants' eggs for the goldfish. All these prize leghorns you hear about are the merest novices compared with William's protégés. Then John looks after the staggery, Henry works the colored fountain, and Peter paints the peacock's tails. This keeps them all busy, but James is forever hanging about. Almost seems as if they were human, he said, as we stood and listened to the rooks. Oh, are you there, James? It's a beautiful day. Who said that first? I believe you did. Them there rooks always make a place seem so homelike. Rooks and crocuses, I say, and you don't want anything more. Yes, well, if the rooks want to build in the raspberry canes this year, let them, James. Don't be inhospitable. Of course, some do like to see primroses, I don't say, but primroses, I knew there was something. Where are they? It's too early for them, said James hastily. You won't get primroses now before April. Don't say now as if it were my fault. Why didn't you plant them earlier? I don't believe you know any of the tricks of your profession, James. You never seem to graft anything or prune anything, and I'm sure you don't know how to cut a slip, James. Why don't you prune more? Prune now. I should like to watch you. Where's your pruning hook? You can't possibly do it with a rake. James spends most of his day with a rake, sometimes leaning on it, sometimes working with it. The beds are always beautifully kept. Only the most hardly annual would dare to poke his head up and spoil the smooth appearance of the soil. For those who like circles and rectangles of unrelieved brown, James is undoubtedly the man. As I stood in the sun, I had a brilliant idea. James, I said, we'll cut the croquet lawn this afternoon. You can't play croquet today. It's not warm enough. I don't pay you to argue, but to obey. At the same time, I should like to point out that I never said I was going to play croquet. I said that we, meaning you, would cut the lawn. What's the good of that? Why, to encourage the wonderful day, of course. Where is your gratitude, man? Don't you want to do something to help? How can we let a day like this go past without some word of welcome? Out with the mower and let us hail the passing of winter. James looked at me in disgust. Gratitude, he said indignantly to heaven. And there's my 11 crocuses in the front, all a-singing together like anything on 3 bob a week. Well, as you can see, I think our author and maybe James could use a little help from our wonderful Blount County Master Gardeners and maybe some good books on gardening too. I hope you've enjoyed the stories. If you'd like to read more of A.A. Milne or books on gardening, we do have books that you can access online through our Tennessee Reads program or Hoopla. Some of the books for A.A. Milne will include those. A lot of them will be the ones that he wrote for children, and frankly, I don't know about you, but I don't think you're ever too old to visit the 100-acre wood, and this is probably a good time to do it. So please let us know if you have trouble accessing any information, or if you have questions, or if we can help you in any way. We hope you will keep enjoying the outdoors in some form or fashion and keep on gardening. We'd love to hear stories of what you've grown this year. If you've used our seed library, we'd love to hear how all that turned out too. So until next time, you take care, enjoy the beautiful days, and we will look forward to seeing you again when the time is right. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.